Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Just Do You podcast. My name is Eric Nicole, and I'm your host. If you are a first time listener, welcome to the conversation. And if you're a regular, I'm honored that you've decided to join me for another episode. The Just Do You podcast is centered around a network of conversations which are meant to connect us, to inspire us, to find our own confidence, our own voice, and to live our own truth. And who knows, we might even learn a little something new that ultimately allows us to live in the sweet spot that I like to call the Just Do You space of being. Each week, I have the privilege of sitting down for unscripted conversations with friends, family, colleagues, community leaders, and influencers that all share their own personal journeys. I hope that you enjoy our time together as much as I have. We are certainly going to laugh, and yes, we might even cry a little, but in the end, we're going to know that we're not alone during our life's journey. So, are you ready? Great, let's do this. Welcome to the conversation. All right, everyone, welcome to today's episode. We are in season 2, and on today's episode, I am honored to sit down with someone that I have the utmost respect for and who is out as a change maker in our world. And so I'm going to jump right in and introduce everyone to Bamby Salcedo. Hi, Bamby. How are you?
Hi, thank you so much, Eric, for the opportunity to be here with you and to share space with you and to the beautiful and amazing people who are listening at this very moment. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to
Oh,
share my
wonderful.
experience, strength, and hope with all of you.
Thank you again. What's interesting, I was sitting down with someone out in Palm Springs, a mutual friend of ours, and I said, "Hey, do you know anyone that would be a great guest on my podcast, this Just Do You conversation?" And you literally came screaming out of his mouth in the first 30 seconds. And he said, "You've got to sit down with Bambi." And so I, again, am really honored to have this conversation today. We're living in a very different world now in our community, and our community is under attack as it has been. And I think what's so important that however we can help each other and come together as a community and talk and converse and educate and inspire and empower is really important. So I sat down and spent some time on your website, and I will tell you that I was blown away. Number one, we'll put that website up on our social media so people can really take a look, because there is no way that we can cover it in one episode. But I'm going to do a brief introduction and then we're going to jump right into the conversation. As I was reading, you are this international transgender Latina woman. You've received your master's degree in Latinx studies from California's California, Los Angeles. You're the president and CEO of the TransLatin Coalition, which we want to talk about. And you've also developed the Center for Violence Prevention and Transgender Wellness, which is a multi-purpose, multi-service space for trans people in Los Angeles. The bio goes on and talks about your many actions, activism, your involvement in the community, your stance for people in the LGBTQIA community. And it is really outstanding and a bit overwhelming, to be honest. And so I want to spend some time with you today talking about the importance of our voices, our confidence, our stance, and living an authentic life. So, if you don't mind, could you take us back a little bit? Where were you born? What was it like? What was the young Bambi like before we jump into talking about present day?
Yeah, thank you so much. Before I jump into me, who I am, and who like I come to be, I want to highlight something super important that you
Hmm.
mentioned a little while ago about the importance of unity. And I think it's important for us to understand that a lot of times we use catchy phrases and slangs and words that sort of tend to try to mean something for us, but many of us don't necessarily put that into action, right? And
Hmm.
people would say unity is strength, right? Or en español, la unidad hace la fuerza, right? And that is true, right? But I think we need to really understand and take that serious and really understand that in order for us to combat the extreme difficult situations that we are experiencing right now, particularly from extreme conservative religious people and like what is happening politically right now, for
Mhm.
instance, right? That is the only way that we are going to be able to change everything that is happening against our communities. And so I want to encourage for all the listeners to really take that to heart and really do whatever they can to, instead of oppressing our own and trying to keep our own in the margins, that we find ways for us to unify and really strategize and find ways for us to to build a better world for all of us. So I
Beautiful.
wanted to start with that. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm going to come back to that because I think you said something that's really important. And I think something that's surprised me by a multitude of guests that have been on that have said that we need to uplift our own, even inside of our own community, especially during a time where there is conflict and there is hatred coming at us and there is all of this uncertainty. And I think we could spend an entire episode talking about that kind of conversation that exists within our own community. And there is some divisiveness even inside of that community. And that's troubling to me, to be honest. And I don't understand it. And so maybe you can shed a little bit of light on that as we go through and talk a little bit and how we can combat that. How do we get past that conversation and come together as a community to uplift and to educate and to support? How do we do that when there are conversations that exist even inside the building, if you will?
For sure. I think I would say the very first step for us to really take is to be willing and able to open our minds and our hearts. And if we are able to do that, then through us, we can also encourage others to also open their minds and their hearts. And once that happens, then the action takes place, right?
Okay, so how does one then, since we're going down this path, how does one then start to practice that for themselves? What do they need to do?
Be a really great first step, right? So listening to this conversation with no prejudgment, right? Like or prejudice, right? And really listen, right? Open our ears. And then through that, we are able to open our mind. And then through that, we are able to open our heart, right? And so this could be a really first great step, right? And then once we are able to do that, then perhaps we may be able to understand that there are different people, right? That don't necessarily have the same privileges, the same experiences, and that people are people, right? I think the first, or I would say, once we open our mind and our hearts, then we are able to see each other through our humanity, right?
Yeah.
And some of the things that I personally do, that I practice, and that I teach people is another step, right? Can we change the way we hug people, right?
Mm.
Because if you notice, like most people or the majority of us, we hug ourselves too. And I don't know why is that. It just seems like it's automatic.
Mhm.
But if we reprogram ourselves and redirect ourselves to hug each other left to left, which is where our hearts are, then there's an
Mm.
automatic connection. And we are unifying our hearts through that,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? And at the beginning, it may not be significant to people, but as we change our behavior, right, then we are able to connect our hearts and connect to our humanity, right?
It's
But people don't
really,
think of that.
no, they don't think of it because we become the systems of the machine, right? We become so conditioned to the way that we think things are. And people may hear something like you said, hug left to left, and say, oh, that takes work, or that would take a complete reprogramming of the
It
brain.
does.
Absolutely. And it does. And that's my point. Absolutely. Do we need to reprogram? I often think it's cliche now, but there's statement that says the call's coming from inside the house. And I always relate that to our own journeys, is that call of our perceptions and our assumptions and our predictiveness is coming from inside the house. It's coming from inside us. And when we can shift that and change that, I was sharing on a previous episode, I did a conversation last season with a trans man who had never shared his story online, on social media. And when we spent some time together, like you and I are doing today, by the end of the conversation, by the end of that hour, my life completely changed because I was able to see his journey and what he went through as a trans man, going through the process, going through the emotions, going through everything that was part of his journey. And I ended up having this incredible respect, not only for him, but for the entire trans community. It changed my world. And I'm a member of the community, Bamby, you know that. And so for me to have that experience, I knew that if that conversation could get out to my heterosexual friends and listeners and family and the people that I have heard make comments about that segment of our community, beautiful community, that it would change. And so I love that you continue to use the words open heart and open our minds in order to have that unification. And one thing that is so great about you and your organization and others that are out there is that we're causing people to stop and think a little bit and pause for that moment to reconsider or to ask a question. And I've always said, especially given this kind of political climate that we've been in and all of this hatred that's been coming towards the trans community, is have you spent some time with anyone in the trans community? Have you sat and had a conversation with anyone? Have you taken the time to learn about them? Because the reaction that you're having towards this individual or towards this community is not your own. Did you think that thought? Or did the thought think you? Meaning, is that something that you have in your inheritance that you're bringing with you? I appreciate you making the point that when we open our hearts and we open our minds and we open our love to others, life changes.
Of course, but I think also it requires for all of us to be
Yeah.
intentional, right? Like
Intentional. Say the
yes,
word again. It's intentional. Yes.
exactly. Like we do have that intention, right? I want to change myself. I want to change the way I think. I want to change the way I act, right? I want to change the way I react,
Mhm.
right? And so it requires intention. And so I'm really grateful that that I'm able to grow as a person. And
Mhm.
through my growth, I am also able to pass that on in
Yeah.
whatever way possible. I've been very lucky to have overcome and survived many different challenges in my life.
Mhm.
And we can go back to your initial question.
We don't have to. It's a
Yeah, I
question. We
know,
don't have
no, of
to.
course, because it's part of who I am, truly, right?
Mhm.
So, anyways, I was born and raised in Guadalajara, Jalisco, in Mexico. I was a very, I'm gonna say, troubled child, a child who was very needy, who needed a lot of love, understanding, and support, and wasn't getting it because also my parents at that time were, when they met, they were very young and they conceived us, and they were trying also to try to figure out their lives. My father left my mother before I was born. And so my mother was left to raise three children by herself as a young person. And later she got together with a very abusive man. And that led for me to essentially find refuge on the streets. So I started using drugs when I was about 8 years old. I became one of those children of the street in Mexico, like one of those poor kids that are on the streets, sniffing glue, shoe shining, selling gums on the bars and all of that. And I started being institutionalized when I was 12 years old. So from 12 to 16, I was in and out of juvenile correctional facilities in Mexico. And then at 16, inside of one of these facilities, my father came to Guadalajara. He was living in the United States at that time. And he came down to look for us. And I had the opportunity to meet him, and um, he had formed his family and his life here in the United States and offered for me to come if I wanted to. And when I got out from that correctional facility at that time, I was 16 years old, and I called him and I came to the United States as a minor. And of course, you come to the United States with this idea of I'm going to work and I'm going to save my mother from all of her horrible experiences and situations. And I started working as a young person instead of going to school, for instance. And I was exploited as a young person. And then when I turned 18, I left my where I was at, and I came to the Los Angeles, and that's when I started my transition fully. And back in the 80s, there was no type of resources or support for many of us or any of us. And
Mhm.
since I already knew what the streets were like, my resort was the streets. And
Mhm.
that led me to be addicted to drugs, to be homeless, to be a sex worker, to spend about 15 years of my life in and out of jails and prison and immigration detention until I finally was able to reform my life and dedicated my life to find ways to support our community. And
Mm.
so, yeah, so that's where I'm at now.
Thank you for sharing, and thank you for being so open and honest about that. I'm curious, when you were going through that, I ask this a lot of my guests. There's something inside of you as you're going through the journey of your life and these circumstances and these situations are happening to you. Was there a conversation larger than you? I guess the better question is, how did you get through that? How did you find the resilience and the energy to push through? Did you see a brighter future for yourself somewhere, or was that just in the moment surviving?
I think, again, since I was a child, right, I knew something was up with me. Like I didn't have language, I didn't know
Mm.
what it was. For some reason, I couldn't be myself. And part of that, when I was growing up, I wanted to support my mother. So I was living like two different lives. So from
Mhm.
a very young age, I was able to be resilient, right? And I would go to school. I only went to until sixth grade in Mexico. And so I would go to school and try to be a good student so I would get good grades. While at the same time, I was using drugs. When I was 12, I met a group of young LGBTQ kids. And so I felt like, oh, I found
Mm.
my thrive. But then also I couldn't be me because it was just like a whole bunch of things happening at the same
Sure.
time. And for instance, like the first time that I dressed up, right, with my LGBTQ friends, I was 12. And so that was like, oh my God, this is me, right? Like it was a revelation, while at the same time, I couldn't be me,
Hmm.
right? And then when I was with my father, because he also had his family and his life, right? Like I wasn't really welcome into his home. And so I had to find ways for me to be and to do whatever I needed to do. And then when I turned 18, and I was like at that point to where I need to be myself, right? And I need to escape from all of this and I need to just go wherever I need to go. It took me a long time to really try to find myself. And I do want to say that through all of my troubles and tribulations, right? I knew that there was like a great energy, like a force, right? That was always protecting me because I have survived so many different things, right? Like on the
Hmm.
streets, I have gone through beatings and sexual assault, both on the streets and in prison. I had guns pointed to my head. I had OD'd on the streets and left in alleys for that. So many different things that I survived that I could never explain why. I kept, why am I still here? But now I'm able to understand that there was a greater force that carried
Yeah.
me through all of that,
Yeah.
that allow me for me to really understand that there is to me a God who I believe in, who is loving and who has a purpose for me,
Yeah.
which I never understood. And there was a point to where particular night and when I was in downtown LA in Skid Row, to where I was so tired. I had been on the streets smoking crack and everything in downtown LA, and I was hungry, I was tired, I was hopeless, I was all the different feelings that you feel. And I asked God, help me, please. And I remember the next morning, I don't know what time it was, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. I was walking on 7th Street in Los Angeles, and I saw this woman, this Black woman, and I asked her, can I get some money to eat? And she gave me $5. And those were the $5 that changed my life. I walked over to a place and I remember I bought me a chicken bowl and I ate. And then with the money that I had left, because I think that thing cost like 250 or something.
Mhm.
And with the money that I had left, I just got on a bus because I needed to rest, right? And
Mhm.
I slept on this bus until the bus driver kicked me out. And I got on another bus and I slept again and I was kicked out again. And I got on another bus and somehow I ended up on the doors of a treatment center.
Mhm.
And from there, my life changed. I
Mhm.
was admitted and I stayed 6 months in this treatment center. And then I went to a transitional housing program for 7 months. And that's like how my journey began, right? Like I started,
Mhm.
yeah, I asked for help and I received the help and support, and people believed in me, and that's
Mhm.
how I am here.
Yeah. I've always said that we are all here and put on this earth to be of service to others, and that faith is important. And the thing it's gonna make me emotional, the thing that is so difficult to understand is who we are in this world is not our circumstances. So who we are in this world are beautiful human beings that are designed to love and to give and to be of service and all of that. And who Bambi is and was back then was someone who may not in the moment known what their future held, but there was a plan for you. And so I'm grateful to that woman on the street who gave you the $5
Me too.
to get on a bus. And the thing that's so fascinating about that, Bambi, is that this is not an uncommon story. And I think that's why I'm so grateful that you're sharing the story so honestly and openly, because I don't know that people who are out with their thoughts and feelings and assumptions about the community really understand what it is that an individual goes through. So that woman on the street gave you that $5 and you are now a change maker in the world and making impact. And maybe, just maybe, the experiences that you had from when you were a child and moving to Los Angeles and all of those experiences, as to me unthinkable as they are and how you survived, is miraculous. But all of those experiences that you went through, you are now paying it forward in ways that I think we'll never even be able to understand or to see. It's not tangible because of the impact that you're making out in the world today. And so I know you're grateful to her as well. but I want the listeners to really be with. You're just giving a glimpse and a very bird's eye view of what your life was like. And that's not uncommon. And so when our community is under attack and when people are feeling marginalized, and it's not just our community, it's other communities as well, but when our community is marginalized, there is a sense of despair. There is a sense of resignation or hopelessness. And so I want our listeners to go away from this conversation today, maybe with a little bit different perspective and a little bit more compassion for our community, especially now. So obviously, life changed for you in that moment. You went through rehab, you went through treatment, you came out of the transitional center. When I'm curious, when you came out of that center, what was that moment like for you? What was that
No,
transition?
I do want to say that even then there were many different challenges, right?
Sure, of course.
Like for instance, I remember in this treatment center there was another Black trans woman who had been there for a few months, and I think but a week later that I was there, she graduated from that place. So
Mm,
for months, I was the only trans woman in that place. And
mhm.
my experience in that treatment center was horrible. But the way I thought of it is that this was my life saving, right? This is, if I'm not here, I am going to either gonna be dead, right? Or I'm going to end up in prison for a long time, right? Because I had already been in prison for different times, right? And so I knew that was the only
Yeah.
thing that was there for me to save my life. But I also want to say that before before all of this happened, when I was active on my addiction and on the streets, I remember that there was, I think it was like 97 or 1998, something like that. That's when I started organizing with my
Mhm.
community. I remember that back then the police was horrible with us here, and not just with trans women, but also with the gay community. And they were doing entrapments, and they were doing like vice operations, and they would put us in jail just by if we were walking on the streets, right?
Mhm.
And or if we were even like hanging out, like they would just arrest us and put us in the street and put us in jail. And
Yeah.
so I remember that we did like protests outside the police station and all of that, like really demanding for them to change their tactics and stuff like that. And around that time, there was an organization that started a support group for trans women who all of us at that time were sex workers, right?
Mhm.
Or trans people who were on the street. Very, actually, almost never you would see, what you see now, right? A trans woman on a counter, like doing makeup or
Mhm.
working at a beauty salon or working at a restaurant or any of that. Like you would not see that anywhere. So that's how I started organizing my friends and the people who I was on the streets with who were also trans women, and the vast majority Latinas. And then when I was in the treatment center, there was also no groups for LGBTQ people,
Mhm.
right? And there was also no support for people who were monolingual Spanish speakers, right? So even when
Mhm.
I was in the treatment center, I started the first group for LGBTQ,
Mhm.
right? Or I started a group for monolingual Spanish speakers, right? And I remember my counselor, his name was Richard. No, Richard was my case manager. My counselor was Thomas, a Black amazing gay man. And Richard, my case manager, sent me to learn facilitation skills. And so that's how I was able to.
Mhm.
So I took a course of 40 hours or something to facilitate groups. And that's how I was able to
Wow.
start these groups. And so I started even within the treatment center, I started organizing and advocating because I knew and understood that I had this privilege of getting into this treatment center, like getting the support that I needed. But I also understood that with that privilege, there is also a responsibility.
Mm,
And part of my treatment, or when you're in a treatment center, you go through different phases, right? And part of
sure.
that is part of my treatment and others who were there is in order for you to get out of here, you need to have a job or you need to go to school or you need to do something, right?
Sure.
But I wasn't documented. I am a trans woman and I couldn't get a job. I couldn't do anything. And the only thing that I could think of is I went to a high school to take adult classes and I started taking computers because I didn't even know how to type. I didn't even know how to do anything. And this is in 2001. And so that's how I started learning computers. And then I was transferred to the transitional housing. And when I was like 3 or 4 months in this transitional housing, there was this position open for an outreach worker, specifically working with trans women. And I applied for the job and I got the job to do HIV prevention, basically to go out to the streets, to the corners to where I once stood with my friends to give them condoms and education and all of that. And so that was my first job in the social justice organization. And then from there, I blossomed to become who I am today.
I'm smiling because you use the word blossomed into who you are today. And yet, this is someone who has been to the White House. You have been a speaker at conferences and conventions that span the sexual assault conference, the National HIV Prevention Conference, the United States Conference on HIV/AIDS. You have been a speaker and involved in some of the most powerful conversations that the US has seen. And I was smiling because that is not only somebody who blossomed, but who exploded onto the scene as a very humble and very passionate and very committed humanitarian. And so I am always amazed, Bamby, by the people that I have conversations with that describe themselves in ways that are incredibly humble. And I respect that. But there is a moment where the power needs to be acknowledged and recognized. And to go from circumstances into a position of being a change maker in the world is no easy feat. And so I just want to acknowledge you for that and take a moment and not breeze over that you blossomed into who you are today. It's truly remarkable. I actually felt a little, what's the word I want to use? Like I need to get out and hit the pavement a little bit more when I get back into my normal routine in February after all this travel to really get back and to make the impact. I am super, super impressed by what you've been able to accomplish and what you're out doing. I'm curious if we can, for a moment, have a little conversation about what some of your concerns are for the community as we move into this next couple of years and how not only the community of trans can come together, but how the LGBTQ community can come together and our allies to support the trans community in this impending time.
Yeah,
It could be a whole episode in and of itself. I know. I'm going to ask you
for for sure.
for
Yeah,
the Reader's Digest version.
thank you. So, like my work has always been around my experiences and the experiences of my community, right? I can honestly tell you that the same experiences that I went through when I was 18, when I started my transition, are the same experiences that young people are experiencing today, right?
Sure.
And I think it's also important to understand and recognize that the attacks against our community is not something that is happening right now. Trans people, gender not expansive people, intersex people, the LGBTQ community have been oppressed, attacked, and marginalized since the invasion of the colonizers. Through religion, they try to erase our existence, right? Through the indoctrination process. And
Right.
so that has happening for centuries, right?
Yeah.
Yet we're still here. And so I think what has happened, if we can just think about what has happened in the last, let's say, 10 years. We saw Laverne Cox being in the cover of Time magazine, for instance. We saw like a little boom of trans people gaining a little bit of power,
Mhm.
a little bit, right? There, I remember in 2015, we, along with other groups in Colorado, we organized a protest, the Creating Change Conference, for instance. And that was around because of the violence that we were experiencing and continue to experience today. But then,
Right.
for those of listeners who don't know and who don't know what Creating Change is the biggest national LGBTQ conference in the United States. And so we as transgender nonconforming and intersex people felt that our allies within LGBT community needed to step up and do
Mhm.
better. And so we shut down the opening plenary session and took over the stage and demanded that there was more investment in the lives of trans people. And
Wow.
from there was a shift. I remember that there was a particular foundation who committed to invest $20 million in trans-led organizations and leadership development for trans people and others, right? And we as an organization are beneficiaries of that. And so extreme right-wing religious conservatives are seeing that trans people are being funded. Trans people are gaining a little bit of political power. Like we're seeing trans women, men being council members, being assembly members, being senators, trans people receiving services, trans people going to school. So they are seeing all of that. And so they're developing this strategy. They have developed this strategy to take the little bit that we have gained. Meanwhile, we are a small, minute, poor community,
Mhm.
right? And our allies who said that they're our allies, they don't step up to the plate and
Right.
support us and do whatever needs to be done in order for us to continue to exist in this world. And that is
Mhm.
why we have over 400 pieces of legislation in several states, right? In about 30 states, trying to really negate and take away healthcare access, for instance, like
Right.
all of those things. So there's no coincidence that they are doing all of that. However, we as a community, and I can tell you that we as an organization, the TransLatin Coalition has become the biggest trans-led organization in the United States. We are making sure that we combat all of that. We believe in the empowerment of our community through service provision. If you're not supporting people with the basic things that people need, like food, housing, employment, violence prevention, like all of those things that many of us take for granted, then you're not able to empower or organize people, right?
Right.
And we do that. We have built a multiplicity of services specifically designed and dedicated to support our community. We give lunch every day here at our organization. We have clothes hygiene kits. We have legal services. We have violence prevention services. We have a house where we can house up to 25 people. We have a program specifically to support aging trans people. We have also do macro level work to really shift and change the way people think of us and the way people, yeah, people basically treat
Hmm.
us, right? And so that's why we do policy work. We
Hmm.
influence policy. We do culture transformation trainings. We create our own content. If you go to our YouTube channel, there's so much content there that people can take advantage of. And so we are an organization that functions with these two arms. And
Hmm.
we are ready to combat all of those crazy, conservative, extreme religious people who are trying to diminish and devalue us. We are
Yeah.
saying,
Yeah.
here we are, and you cannot erase our existence.
100%. I've always said there's two groups you don't piss off, mothers and the LGBTQ community. You just don't, because we're going to come out scratching and fighting. And we've been here for as long as everyone else, and we're not going anywhere. And the fact that you have started this organization that in many cases provides basic necessities, Bambi, basic necessities for a human being to exist, to live, to have hygiene, to have comfort, to have a sense of belonging. And
But
then you
also to
take it,
organize.
but that's what I'm saying. And then you
Right.
take the next step. So so on the fundamental level is this, you're giving basic necessities for people that should be a no-brainer, that they should be able to get anywhere. On top of that, you take it 5, 10, 15 steps higher, and you're out creating policies and change and awareness and education and raising your voices. And this is the thing that I don't think they're prepared for. And I remember that rally that we went to at the center in San Diego. I heard a lot of these organizations speak, and I had this moment of, oh, damn, these people who are trying to silence us have no idea what they're up against when it comes to people like Bambi and this organization and coalition and others out there. Kudos to you. But also, I want our listeners to understand that process and that commitment that you and your organization have doesn't come with its own struggles. You need funding, you need support, you need volunteers, you need all of those things that can continue. And you need our community, the entire acronym to stand with you and to stand with our community as a whole and fight,
I think
right?
if there was any other moment, this is the moment, right?
This is the moment.
And I think we have to understand that the other group, extreme conservative religious
Hmm. Yep.
individuals, they are well funded and well organized. And if you're not well funded, then you're not able to organize.
Hmm.
And so I think we're in a pivotal moment for all of us to really think about, specifically in philanthropy, because our government is not going to give us money to do the work that
Hmm.
needs to happen, right?
Hmm.
Because that's the system. But there is so much money in philanthropy. And even those who call themselves allies and comrades and people that support us, a lot of them are the same ones who are funding the other side.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And we cannot continue with the hypocrisy that is happening, right?
Mhm.
Honestly, we are at a moment to where you need to take a side.
Yes.
And we can, if people believe in social justice, then they need to truly do,
Mhm.
because actions speak
Yes.
louder than words.
But here's the problem, Bambi, that I think a lot of people don't realize is that there is a mentality or an internal monologue going on in many people, both inside the community and outside the community, that if it doesn't directly affect me, then it doesn't directly affect me.
Totally. Or
And
people have become complacent.
yes, we have to change that conversation. It affects you. It affects you more than you will ever know because what it's doing is it's chipping away at the foundation of our community. If one segment of that community is affected in any way, it encompasses everyone. And we all pay the price because it gives the other side ammunition and agreement and support. And so all of our
Yeah.
community and our allies have to pick their stance and get out and be vocal about it. And I know we're tired. I know we're overwhelmed. I know we're resigned. I know we're burnt out. But now is the
But you don't have
time.
to do the work. Give us the money and we'll do the work.
Yeah,
If you have the means, right? Put your money
right.
where your mouth,
There's that. Put your money where
right?
your mouth
Like,
is. Yes. But I also want our brothers and sisters to go out there and raise their voices and support our community and support other marginalized communities. We are all human beings at the end of the day, and we all deserve to be recognized, to be cherished, to be celebrated, and to be loved. And that comes from my very good friend, Mama Tits, out of Puerto Vallarta, when she said at her show, surround yourself with people who celebrate you. And that's what we need to do in this moment. That's my little 2 cent soapbox moment.
but I think so. If we go back to the beginning, unity and
Hmm.
right, and shifting the way we think and the way we act and the way we can see each other through our humanity. We can become oppressors because that's what's happened also. Like you said, some of us have gotten to a better place, and we have to understand and see how history has unfolded for all of us.
Yeah, yeah.
If we look, for instance, at the beginning of the gay liberation movement
Mhm.
back in the 60s, let's say in the 60s, because the pivotal moment was in New York. But even though there were other events that took place, they weren't as noticed. But anyways, so it started as a gay liberation movement. And then back in
Mhm.
the 80s, it became about
Mhm.
gay rights
Mhm.
because of AIDS. And
Mhm.
then eventually continued to be gay rights, but around marriage,
Mhm.
right? And all through all of this 50 years, trans people have been pushed to the side. So our own community
Yes.
has kept trans people in the margins. So if we look, the gay and lesbian community has become very powerful, like in the last 50 years, right? Wealth is power. Meanwhile, trans people are one of the most poor populations in the world. Meanwhile, trans women specifically are the most impacted by HIV infection.
That again? Say that one more time.
Meanwhile, trans women are the ones that are most impacted by HIV infection.
Trans women. Yes. Yeah.
Yes, we have the highest rates of infection, right? And meanwhile, we trans people continue to fight for their existence. And within the LGBT community, there has this oppression that has happened. And so, how do we transform that? Because if we find that unity, we know that we're powerful. We know that we can shift the way society sees us, right? We have created those changes. And right now is that pivotal moment for all of our communities to really step up and stand with trans people and fight. And I'm hopeful. I've always been hopeful. That's why I'm still here. My hope has kept me here for
Mhm.
almost 30 years of service to my people. And so I'm hopeful that we can change the world as we want and live in a world that we want to live in.
All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning in today for my incredible conversation with the amazing Bamby Salcedo, founder of the TransLatin Coalition. Bamby's powerful story of resilience and perseverance through extraordinary circumstances was truly inspiring. We had so much more to discuss, so we're continuing our conversation in next week's episode. So be sure to tune in next Thursday. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. In the meantime, make sure to subscribe to the Just Do You podcast on your favorite platform so you never miss a new episode, which again drop every Thursday. If you're loving the show, please share it with your friends and take a moment to rate and give us a review. We'd love to hear your thoughts. You can also stay connected with us on Instagram at JustDoYouPod for updates and favorite moments from our weekly episodes. I'm really excited to welcome you back next week for the continuing of this conversation. And remember, as you step out into the world, just do you.